Welcome to Intelligent Think, the podcast in which we explore what makes ideas great, how we can make our thinking better, and why it's so important to share your ideas with the world. Plus, we'll talk to thought leaders and authors about their own ideas and experiences so you can mine them for gold nuggets that can help you along your own journey. I'm Verity Craft.
And I'm Christina Wedgwood.
And this is Intelligent Think. And today we wanted to chat about the skills that are needed to actually write a book. So we help people write their books all the time, and in particular thought leadership books, because that's what we're expert in. I don't know that we could say for novels what you'd need. But what do you actually need and what don't you need that maybe you think you do? So do you want to kick us off, Sue? What do you reckon are the, I guess, misconceptions that people have, or the things that they think they need that maybe they don't need?
I think there's a lot of things that people think they need to be able to write a book that they don't, and chiefly that is to be a good writer. That's a really big mental block for lots of people. And it sounds a little bit funny that I'm saying you don't need to be a good writer to write a really good book, but there are heaps of other sort of supports and skills that can complement, the writing that you can do. I think much more important than being a good writer is being a good thinker.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is more important that you are expert in whatever your field is, that's really important, but that you are able to think about that expertise in a way that puts you in a position to go, what does my reader need? What's the journey that I'm trying to take them on? How is this idea going to help them? How do I back up this idea? How do I make this idea better? How do I flesh this out so that it's easier to understand or easier to apply? All of those are thinking skills. They're not actually writing skills. And what I find is that for most people, most of the clients that we work with tend to be actually really good communicators, even if they're not really good writers. So you might be a great speaker, but not a great writer. Well, you can still communicate that idea, and then that idea can get down on the page in some way, whether that's via transcription or a ghostwriter, or just you writing it down in whatever form it is, and then somebody else coming along and editing it to be much better. But the thinking has to come from you. The thinking has to be good. So you have to be able to look really critically at your ideas and how to make them better, how to make them more applicable, because that's the really key skill that I think sets apart good thought leadership books from, okay, that's fine.
I think the thinking is exactly right, but you need to be able to articulate in some way your expertise and what you do well. So I think the people that have an advantage here are the ones who deliver their ideas and messages already in a range of ways. So they might be coaches or trainers or facilitators or speakers, like you've said before. They are still good at distilling an idea or a framework or a perspective into something that they can articulate well. They don't necessarily need to have the brain, hands-on keyboard connection nailed.
Yeah, and I think that's the sad thing, is that a lot of people don't write a book who would write an incredible book because their ideas are so good, because they feel like, oh, I'm not a writer. And so they, might be delivering it in lots of other ways, in a really great way, but they reduce the impact that they could have on more people by not writing their books simply because they think that they're not a good writer.
I had an idea and it's just pissed right off out of my brain.
So our good thinking is working really well today then.
Good thinking, good at articulating ideas. Nailing it. Come back to me, circle back around. Let's go somewhere else first, because that will crop back up if it was
absolutely.
Important.
Well, I think one of the other things still on that kind of good thinking is people who are able to be quite, not necessarily critical, but maybe it's self-awareness, or just being able to look inwards at themselves and really assess both their ideas, but also their own story, their own emotion. Like, those are the people who write really powerful books. I think the people who just come and go, I'm going to put some information in a book, even if they are really expert in the field, are not necessarily going to write as compelling of a book, as engaging of a book, as effective of a book, because they haven't put themselves into it. Like, if you read something like Brene Brown's books, they have so much of her in them. They have so much of her story in them. And that's kind of what makes them interesting and compelling, versus if another academic came along and just wrote a book that was about all the theory behind vulnerability, it wouldn't connect in the same way because they wouldn't be being vulnerable.
I think a great book has a balance of evidence base and story. And it's the story, it's always the story that is going to make you feel something and connect with something. And, the best stories, they have a sort of inflection point or a change, a moment of transformation or transition where you've gone from thinking, behaving, feeling one way to something else because something's happened. So that's the bit that draws us in and is relatable in a book. So I think, but would people still be put off by, I don't know if I'm a good storyteller? I don't know. I think the edge comes there from being steeped in experience of what you're writing about. So if you have delivered it with people or you've worked through a methodology with others and with yourself, that is an advantage to someone who's just studied like an academic that's studied the research or is summarizing, the result of an academic. Something's happened in an academic bubble. You want the lived experience of it as well, which is interesting for people who are battling that, do I have what it takes to write a book? Because we think that actually those academic credentials are important, are going to help us and set us up better. But I would say actually no, some practical lived experience of what you're talking about is better than what letters come after your name.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that can go for academics as well. I look at somebody like Adam Grant, who is very much an academic. And, you can tell that a lot of the stories in his books are maybe drawn from research and then they've found stories that have fit. But often the most compelling ones are where he talks about the things that he's done in his classes or with his students. And those are kind of the things where they get brought to life more. So, it can still be academics, but it's what's the lived experience that you can bring to it. I think it's not a skill, it's an experience, but the skill that you have is being able to look at what your experience is and then find where are those examples of what you're talking about,
how it relates.
Yeah, exactly. And that doesn't mean that you have to be, an amazing storyteller who is always at the front of the room, telling funny stories and making everyone laugh. But if you can just tell a simple story, then sometimes, a great coach or a great editor can bring all of the other magic out of that story as well. But you've still got to be able to identify those and be able to go, this was an example of this, and find that within your kind of lived experience.
I think too, that's where working with a coach or an editor helps, and you get around the need for great writing skill piece as well, because actually when you're working with whoever it is, any sounding board, they could be paid formal kind of working relationship or not, you are you're telling them those stories verbally, which is easier often for people. So whether you're the one that then writes it down afterwards or the other person is, because maybe that's what they're employed to do in this case, once you've sort of explored a story or said it out loud to someone, go and tell the cat if you'd like to before you sit and try and write it down. That also helps. It sort of unlocks the that comes from a blank page with nothing on it and your fingers kind of feeling stuck on a keyboard. So we trade stories verbally all the time. I think that's a good unlock for being able to write one in a book.
I think that kind of takes me on to one of the other skills. It's almost the misconception that people think, which is that they need to be really creative to write a book and they need to write it when they're struck by inspiration. And I would say that while absolutely, yes, follow the energy, if you're excited about something, write that part of the book down, focus on that. While you should do all of those things, in reality, the skills or the traits that people need to complete a book are generally discipline and dedication. It's being willing to
stuff.
Yeah, it's the really unsexy stuff. It's being willing to put aside time, whether it's every day or every week, to actually just sit down and put something on the page, even if it's a bit shit.
Yeah, nudge it forward somehow and keep the promise to yourself or to the project that you will, show up for it.
Yes,
at the times that you've said you're going to.
Yes. Dedication and discipline when it comes to writing your book are going to take you so much further than waiting for inspiration ever could. Even if you are somebody who gets inspired quite often or feels really creative quite often. Because if you actually set aside the time to work on your book each day or each week, and, it doesn't have to be I always have to write X number of words. It could be I have to write some words, any words, or I have to do something to move my book forward. If I'm not feeling the writing, then it might be doing research or it might be interviewing someone. But if you actually set that aside of time, you will make progress on your book and you will get to the finish line. Whereas if what you do is go, I need to follow the energy, I need to make sure that I'm going to get here
today.
Yeah, and fine, if that's the way that you want to go for it. But it is really unlikely that you're going to make it to the end of the book, because there is always going to be a certain point where it is no longer, woohoo, this is so exciting. And actually it's I just need to get it to the finish line. And obviously, the work that we do with clients, we try and make it as fun as possible and keep the motivation up and keep the energy. But it's a long project. It's much more of a marathon than a sprint. So you are going to need to make sure that you've got that discipline there.
Absolutely.
What are the other things that you reckon are important? If I'm going to jump back in.
Yeah, go.
I would say one of the other things is not necessarily a specific skill that everyone has, but it's that you're able to think about how are my skills that I use day to day or in other places, how are my strengths that I've got able to be transferred to this. So Daria Williamson, who is our very first Better Book Project alumni to publish a book, her book Unleash Your Awesome talks about kind of finding your strengths and living in your zone of genius. And so she has an analogy that you and I have talked about lots that I really like, which is kind of this idea of, a house has a front door but it's got other ways to get in. So yes, you might be able to open the door to the house that is writing your book because you are a great writer and you're great at all of these things. But if you can't open the door, there's still other ways to get into the house. So what are the other windows that you can make it in through? So for example, maybe you're really, really good at connecting with people. Well, then maybe you want to do most of your book based around interviews and actually talk to people as part of getting that together. Maybe you're really, really good at synthesizing information. Well, then pull together everything that you've ever created and figure out how that can be used for the book. Maybe you are really bloody good at doing research. Cool. That's a skill that's super helpful. So it's not just about, I need to sit down and write. It's actually, you might have all of these skills that can be used in different ways to help you get to an incredible book.
I think there's something, though, there about self-awareness too. And if you are aware of what your strengths are, you maybe also, I think you're helped in the book journey by knowing where not your weaknesses, but where the places that you might get stuck or fall down are. And I think that comes in a few ways. Directly or most obviously, you can see that if you know that the aesthetics of your book are not, you're probably not going to set out to go, I'm going to design my own cover, because that would be silly. If you know that sort of look and feel stuff is not your jam, then you're going to use somebody else.
Maybe just don't do it anyway unless you're a book designer.
Probably not. It is a very specific skill. But, there's other things like that too. But also, I think when I think about the skill of the people that have moved through their book journey more easily than others, there's a lot of self-awareness needed around when are you procrastinating or avoiding something because maybe you don't actually know everything there yet and you need to do a bit more reading or research or whatever. Or when are you using reading and research to procrastinate actually writing or facing some of your ideas on this topic? So I think there's quite a lot of self-discovery that actually happens as you write your book, but with a little bit of self-awareness of like, I keep getting stuck here, or I am avoiding the same sort of thing, or here's the thought spiral that I set off when I get to this place. That can help you kind of unblock yourself and keep moving as well.
I was laughing when you were talking about your reading and researching in order to procrastinate, because I'm like, I know who did that in their book.
Well, she nearly did. Me, I nearly did. But actually one of the others in the Better Book Project spotted it quite soon, kind of before I could get stuck there, and was like, see, you need to move past that, get that bit out of your way, and, go and back what you think first and then come back to that later, because he could also see, I guess I'd coached him for long enough before I was sitting alongside him as a participant, that would be a trap that I would fall into. So I think knowing where your potholes are going to be is really useful. And a coach can, or even a community of other people doing the book thing as well, which, there's a variety of those, structured or less structured, they can kind of hold a mirror up to some of those things, or maybe challenge you too. So that's a skill that is not is not writing related, but certainly helps along the way.
Obviously, you're a good writer, like you're a great writer, it's what we've built our whole business around. But what were the other strengths or skills that you felt like you pulled on most in the book process?
Within myself, I don't know. I'm going to mull on that for a minute, because I know that I think my self-awareness did help me, which is why I brought that up. I know where my sort of tendencies are, or where the path of least resistance is for me if I'm finding something hard. So I think an awareness of that and balancing, knowing what I needed to balance that out, or sort of shave off the worst of my tendencies. And luckily, because, we have a team that works in this way and on this stuff, I could lean on people. I think I'm quite good at asking for help. And I also think a strength of mine is I talk things out loud to figure them out. And so even though the task was write a book, I relied on how I process information and how I explore ideas in my work already, which is actually verbally, even though writing is my thing. And I did that quite a lot as well. I asked people to be those sounding boards, and sometimes it was the team, and sometimes it was, honestly, sometimes it was prospects or clients, or even friends or family who aren't in our kind of industry or work world at all, and getting a variety of people who I was trying to articulate what I was thinking to, some who would have some industry knowledge and some that didn't, really helped me to hone what I was saying as well.
That comes back, I think, to when you are great at communicating your ideas, you might not be great at communicating them in writing, but if you are really used to talking about your ideas, whether that's when you're testing them out with people, or whether that's on stage or in workshops or in trainings, when you are used to talking about your ideas, you start to see what people connect with. You start to see what they don't understand. You start to see what they get really excited about. And so the more that you do that, like actually talking is a really important skill for writing.
Yes.
Because the talking about your ideas is what allows you to test in real time what works and what doesn't about an idea.
Totally.
And then that can go into a book. Because if you just went away and wrote in solitude, you would never know what anybody else would think about your ideas. Like you would have no clue. You could write something that was completely useless to people or completely uninteresting.
Or use like totally the wrong terminology. Like the bit that really, I was surprised how much it landed was the idea around the reluctant thought leader. And every single person I said that to, client, prospect, established thought leader, just thinking about going on the journey, their face changed when I said it, and they nodded in recognition, or they smirked because they were thinking exactly how that plays out for them. And so for me, it was this working thing. It was like, I'm just going to park it with that name because I haven't come up with anything better yet. And then actually, everyone was kind of a bit attached to the term that it became the thing that was retained because there wasn't any point to come up with a different word
if people
for
get
it,
and they understand
they were like, it had too much resonance to let go.
Yeah, and I think when we get caught up in the idea of the book is mine, I have to write it, I have to sit down and do this and be really disciplined, and I know we've talked about how important discipline is, but when we get caught up in that idea of I've got to do that all solo, we forget that actually what makes our books rich, what takes an idea from just, oh, that's interesting, to something that's really valuable and useful to people and really exciting and engaging for them is actually putting it out into the real world and getting feedback on it. And yes, you can do that by writing your book, but that's going to be an awful lot of effort just to discover that something doesn't connect with people.
Totally.
So if you can test it out in thinking, in talking, then your ideas are going to be that much stronger and your book is going to be that much stronger as well.
Absolutely. And I think you can do that and still have it be yours. So, you don't need to be, I think a skill is actually openness. You don't need to be guarded with your thinking or ideas. I know, like, to an extreme, Stan posted something recently about, if I use a ghostwriter to write my book, is it still mine? And he speaks in there about how his intention to begin with was very much to do the writing himself, but then he quickly realised that if it was just up to him, it wasn't going to get done because he was being pulled in too many other directions. So hence he talks about Dave and the conversations he's had with Dave and how he's realised that even though Dave is physically writing the stuff down, it's still his thinking and it's still his ideas. And he uses the analogy of, I use an accountant to do my P&L. It's still my business. It's still they're still my accounts. I just used someone's skills in a way. And so I think you can lean on people's skills, other people's skills, more than you think you can without taking, like, they don't take away from what it is you're creating.
Yes. What it comes down to really is that if you want your ideas to have an impact, they need to be relevant, they need to be valuable, they need to be engaging, and the only way that you'll do that is by testing them out. But testing them out is not the same thing as taking them from other people necessarily. Like, you're going to get inspiration from other places, you're going to get feedback from other places.
And perspectives. You want other perspectives.
Other perspectives, for sure. But I think also when it comes down to it is it still has to come from you. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, is that if you're just going to regurgitate what everybody else has said, that also is not going to be engaging or interesting or valuable. So it still has to be you and your perspective and your ideas, but you can leverage other people's brains, other people's experiences, other people's excitement and energy in order to take them to the next level and turn them into something really brilliant.
Totally. So I think we've talked about skills. I think one of the others that we haven't really touched on is that sort of self-propulsion, but maybe that's what comes from that dedication and discipline. Being able to kind of get yourself going and find the little wins and the, show up for it time and again. I think one of the starting things that people overlook, or when they're trying to think, can I write a book, and will I be able to do this? Do I have what it takes? We think of the skills, certainly, like, can I write? But we also, what people fail to think about, I think, or realize, is how much material they've actually already got. So even for a seasoned writer, starting with a blank page is daunting and scary and not easy to break into. But would you agree that most of the thought leaders that we work with, they actually don't start with a blank page at all?
Well, they don't have to if they don't want to, I suppose. Because some people, I think, do like to start from a blank page. I find it easier to write from scratch than I do to edit. Like, I think editing is far harder than writing from scratch. So I probably would prefer a blank page. But I think for a lot of people, that blank page is really scary, especially if they're not a writer. And you're right. A lot of people have more material, more content than they even realize that they have. And you can use that as the starting place for a book. And actually, this is one of the places that I do think, while I don't think AI should be used for a lot of pieces of the book process, this is one place where I do think it can be used really well, is if you've got a huge amount of content, whether that is blogs, LinkedIn posts, newsletters, podcast transcripts, if you've got content, you could use AI to go, here's all of my content, here's the plan that I've already created for the book, and that is a really important piece of this, is have your plan up front. Do not ask ChatGPT to plan it for you. You do the thinking. But if you've got the plan, you're really clear on what your reader journey is, you're really clear on what the point of the book is, why you're doing it, what the core message is, and you've got a bunch of your own content in your own words, there's no reason why you can't use AI to go, can you take all of these, pull out pieces that are relevant and put it into this order, basically? And then you've got something to work from. So it's one of those things that it's not a skill, but it is something that you've got to draw on, is all of that content that you've created in whatever form that is, you can use that to get started really effectively and take away potentially weeks of writing because you've actually already written it or you've already talked about it, and that gives you a starting place. So I think that's a really important thing for people to remember, is you can start from a blank page if that's what you prefer, but you don't have to.
I know that Bill from Thought Leadership Leverage, he used AI to weed down. He'd written the bulk of the book. He had about 75% of it there, and it was the stories that he needed to weave in. And he didn't use AI to tell the stories, but he knew he had them already buried in like over 600 podcast transcripts or something. All looking at that together, I can't remember the figure he said, I wish I could, but it was some staggering amount of millions of words. And so he used AI as almost the locator, like the story finder. He could prime it really well with prompt it with what sort of stories he needed, and it could pick through all of that content, which is his own conversations, to find the ones that would make good examples that he could then kind of isolate in that big sea of stuff and write from as well.
So actually, I think that's where the skill comes, is in being able to recognize what you actually need and what you don't need. Where are the things that you're really good at? So if you're really good at explaining your framework, for example, you're probably just going to be able to sit down and write that from scratch, or you might already have it. You might have it in workshop scripts or, speeches that you can take and just flesh out. If you know that you're not necessarily the best at recognizing stories, that's where you can, you either ask somebody else to tell you, oh, okay, well, what I've just talked about would be interesting, which stories would be best, or you can use a tool to pull them out from the things that you've already done. And so I think the skill there is actually in going, what's the piece that I need or I'm lacking, and how can I achieve that from what I've already done, from what I've already created? Yeah. Because if you are a thought leader, and those are the people that we work with, you've probably already been creating a huge amount of content for a really long time if you've been doing it effectively, because that's how you build thought leadership, is, sharing your ideas consistently over a long period of time. So being able to look at everything that you've got and go, what's relevant and what isn't, or what can I use to tell me what's relevant and what isn't. That's a really helpful skill to have when you're writing a book.
Absolutely. I think so too is the skill of subtraction or deletion. The ability to look at something and be really frank and honest about whether this is contributing to, the journey you're trying to, is this crucial to moving a reader from where they were to where you're trying to take them? That is a skill.
You have to be able to kill your darlings. You have to be able to say, yep, that is not serving this book, or that is not serving this story, or that is not serving this idea, or that is not serving this reader, and be willing to cut it, even if it took you a really long time to write.
And the skill, the little piece there, I think, is being able to turn off or remove, or maybe you never turn it off, but just step aside slightly from that creative ego that wants to show its workings, remind everybody how clever they are, all of those things. And, that sounds silly, but it's true. We've done all that work. We want to put it in there, but it doesn't always advance what you're trying to do. And I think I've actually talked to someone recently about the creative ego, or maybe having to turn the volume of that creative ego down around even something like the title of the book, and being, he's having to accept that clear actually trumps clever in this case. So something that is really creative and maybe clever, and maybe it's a bit funny or witty or whatever, it appeals to him, tickles him, but it's going to confuse readers. So actually, clarity wins. And that's hard to accept sometimes when you're a bit bound up in the idea.
And which actually brings me to the next skill, which is that in order to write a great book, you have to be really open to feedback.
True.
Because in reality, the bulk of where your book goes from okay to great is in the editing.
Absolutely.
And if you are unwilling to listen to an editor, that doesn't mean that you have to implement everything that they say, because there will be some things that you go, actually, no, this is the right decision for my reader. This is the right decision for me, for my thought leadership, for my business. Absolutely. But an editor will give you some feedback that sometimes doesn't feel very nice because you've put lots of effort and heart into your book, and you have to be willing to be open to making those changes if you want your book to be great.
Yes, and even if they deliver it nicely, it doesn't always feel nice because of the amount of, additional energy and time that it's going to sign you up for. So, it's disheartening to hear about big changes, even if they're delivered kindly, when you think that you've actually almost reached the top of the mountain.
It's one of the challenges we see all the time, right? As people come to us and they go, I've written my book, can you edit it? And it's really hard to be like, you haven't actually finished your book. You've written a first draft, but there's a lot to come.
Exactly.
And sometimes when we give feedback, which does tend to be very detailed and does tend to be quite in-depth, and also, while it is very, very kind, often creates a lot of extra work for them, unless they're going to pay us to implement the changes, it can be a little bit disheartening. And so I think that resilience and that recognition that the first draft is not finished, and that being open to feedback and making changes is what is going to get you to something really great. That is such an important skill, because I think otherwise it's really easy to get stopped by the editing stage.
Are there any others? We've got, that you don't actually need as much proficiency in writing as what you think you do, because there are other tools, especially to capture your verbal articulation of ideas into written form. We've talked about resilience. We've talked about self-awareness. We've talked about, what are the others?
That you can pull on what you've already got, that you're open to feedback. So yeah, what are the other things that we haven't
Is there anything else to land
already?
this plane? What haven't we said?
I think one of the other things that I see people who write really great books and use them really well, one of the other skills that they have is that they don't just see the book as the book. Mm-hmm. So they don't get caught up in, I am so focused on writing that I forget about everything else. I think the people who do really, really well, this isn't so much to write a great book, because I think that some of the people that we have worked with, probably yourself included, who go really tunnel focus in on writing a really great book, have written some incredible books. But I think if you then also want to leverage it really well to build your business, to have a bigger impact, the people who are able to go, oh, I'm writing this at the moment, I could use that over here in my business. Or, oh, I want to test out this idea, I could use that to grow my audience so that there's more people who are excited for the book. Oh, I've got the book launch coming up. What do I need to do to get ready? Oh, I've got, I'm going to be publishing in X number of weeks. What do I need to get set up on my website to make sure that I can take advantage of the early flurry? It's the stuff that maybe when you're caught in the writing you don't want to think about, but the people who are able to stay on both levels, who are able to go, I need to keep writing and I'm going to stay focused, but I also recognize that I need to build my audience, that I need to get people excited, that I need to test out my ideas, all that sort of stuff as well, are far more likely to turn their books into successes than those who might write an incredible book but totally ignore everything else outside of their book until the very end.
It's the seeing the wood and the trees that we talk about a bit. That sort of, you can helicopter up to the bigger picture of impact and its place within your thought leadership, as well as be deep in the detail of crafting something awesome.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's not to say that you can't make your book a success if you just go tunnel vision and focus on your book. It's just that it will be far harder if you're only thinking about that stuff when you come out of it.
Longer at the end, right?
Yeah, 100%. So I think that's a really important, it's not necessarily a skill that you might have, but it's an important thing to keep in mind and to try to do, even if it's not your natural inclination, because it will make it so much more successful and have so much more of an impact if you do that up front.
Nice.
Cool. Well, that has been another episode of Intelligent Think. I would like to thank you for listening. You have been listening to Intelligent Think with Verity Craft and Christina Wedgwood, brought to you by Intelligent Inc. Thanks to Lochana Media for video production, Jeff Ong for our theme music, and to you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your friends, and give us a review. And always feel free to send in feedback, because you know how much we love feedback based on everything we talk about. So here is to better thinking together.